They handed me a pen and told me to sign away my grandmother's house. Or they'd make sure I never saw a dime of what she left me. My uncle's hand was on my shoulder, not warmly. Not the way family touches you. The way a bouncer grips someone before throwing them out. I looked down at the document. Then, I looked up at the room full of people who shared my blood and had spent the last 6 days deciding what to do with me. I didn't sign. I didn't cry. I set the pen down flat on the table and walked out of that lawyer's office with nothing but my purse and everything I already knew. Before I tell you exactly how I unraveled 30 years of my family's lies in 11 days and watched my uncle let out of his own home in handcuffs. Tell me something in the comments. Has anyone in your family ever smiled at you while stealing from you? I read every single one. I drove home on autopilot. My hands were steady on the wheel, which surprised me because my chest felt like someone had poured concrete into it. I'm Claire. I'm 32 years old. I'm a paralegal at a mid-sized firm in Columbus, Ohio. And for the last decade, my job has been to read what people don't want read, find what people don't want found, and understand exactly what a document means versus what someone claims it means. My uncle looked me in the eye that afternoon and told me the will was straightforward. He said my grandmother had changed her wishes before she passed. He said she wanted the house and the primary accounts to go into a family trust managed by him, with disbursements decided at his discretion. He said it with the practiced calm of a man who had rehearsed it many times. I knew within 4 minutes that he was lying. I just didn't know yet how deep it went. My grandmother, Dorothy, died 11 days before that meeting. She was 81. She had a 3-bedroom house in Glenview, a savings account she'd built over 40 years of teaching elementary school, and a jewelry box I used to sit in front of as a child while she named every piece, and who it once belonged to. She was not a wealthy woman by any standard measure, but she was consistent. She was the kind of person who updated her will every 3 years, like clockwork, kept printed copies in a fireproof box, and mailed a sealed letter to her attorney after every revision. I knew this because she told me specifically. She sat across from me at her kitchen table 2 Christmases ago, wrapped her hands around her mug, and said, "Claire, I want you to know what I've done with my things, so there are no surprises and no fighting when I'm gone." I wrote it all down. Your uncle has a copy, and so does Gerald at Harmon and Reed. Gerald Marsh, her attorney of 22 years. He was not the attorney running the meeting 11 days after she died. I noticed it the moment I walked in. The office was on the west side, not downtown, where Harmon and Reed had been for as long as I could remember. The man sitting behind the desk introduced himself as Neil Parsons. He was maybe 45, in a suit that was slightly too shiny, with a firm handshake and very careful eyes. My uncle sat to his left, my aunt to his right. My 2 cousins flanked the far wall like decorative furniture. I was given the chair directly across from Neil Parsons, which placed me with my back to the door. I remember thinking that was intentional. Neil Parsons presented a will dated 8 months prior. He spoke about it the way a salesman speaks about a car he knows has a problem quickly, with a lot of words filling the space where questions might form. The document left the house to the family trust, the savings accounts to the family trust, the jewelry listed as personal effects of minimal monetary value, to be distributed at the trustee's discretion. My uncle was named trustee. I was named a discretionary beneficiary, which in plain language means I get whatever he decides to give me, if anything, at whatever time he chooses. I asked to see the signature page. My uncle put his hand on my arm. He said, "Claire, this isn't the time." I said, "I'm a paralegal, and I'd like to see the signature page." Neil Parsons slid it across the desk. I looked at it for exactly as long as I needed to. Then I looked up and said I had some questions about the notarization, and I'd like to take a photograph of the document for my records. My uncle stood up. He was not loud about it. That was always his way, controlled. Quiet. The kind of anger that stays in the jaw and the shoulders. He said that wasn't necessary. He said we were family and this was a difficult time and I was making it harder. He said my grandmother had made her wishes clear, and the least I could do was respect them. I picked up my purse. I set the pen down, and I left. In my car, I sat for 3 minutes before I started the engine. Not because I was falling apart, because I was thinking. My grandmother's signature had a tremor in it. Dorothy had arthritis in her right hand for the last 6 years of her life. Her signature in recent years had a specific adaptation to it, slightly larger letters, a pause visible between the first and last name, a particular way the D curved because of how she had to adjust her grip. I had seen her sign birthday cards, Christmas checks, the deed paperwork, when she refinanced in 2019. The signature on Neil Parsons' will was too smooth, too even, written by someone who had practiced the name but had two fully functional hands. I called my office the next morning and told them I needed family bereavement time. Then I drove downtown to Harmon and Reed. Gerald Marsh had retired 8 months ago. His cases had been transferred to a colleague named Patricia Owens. I asked to speak with her. I explained that I was the granddaughter of a recently deceased client, Dorothy Calloway, and that I had concerns about a will being presented on her behalf by an outside attorney. Patricia Owens was a small woman in her early 60s who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and did not waste words. She pulled up my grandmother's file, looked at it for a moment, and then looked at me over the top of her glasses. She said, "According to our records, the most recent will for Dorothy Calloway was executed 4 years ago, with Gerald Marsh presiding." She said a copy was kept in their secure archive. She asked if I would like her to retrieve it. I said yes. The will Gerald Marsh had drafted left the house to me. The savings accounts, split equally between me and a local literacy foundation my grandmother had volunteered with for 15 years. The jewelry, specifically itemized, piece by piece, with named recipients for each one. My cousin received the pearl earrings. I received the gold bracelet with the blue enamel clasp that had belonged to my great-grandmother. There was nothing ambiguous. There was nothing left to discretion. Gerald Marsh had known Dorothy for over 2 decades and written a document that sounded exactly like her thorough, fair. And without room for interpretation, I sat in Patricia Owens' office and read it twice. Then I asked her if the firm had been contacted by anyone regarding Dorothy Calloway's estate in the last 30 days. She checked. They had not. Not by my uncle. Not by Neil Parsons. Not by anyone. My uncle had bypassed her attorney of record entirely. He had found someone else, someone willing to produce a different document, and had brought the family together around it before anyone thought to ask the right questions. I thanked Patricia Owens. I asked her to make me a certified copy. That afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table with both documents side by side. The legitimate will and the one my uncle wanted me to sign away my rights to. I had been doing this work long enough to know what I was looking at. Document fraud. Probate fraud. Depending on how the accounts had been handled in the 11 days since my grandmother died. Potentially financial elder abuse, with additional charges on the back end. My uncle hadn't just written a fake will. He had timed it. My grandmother had been sick for 8 months. Long enough to plan. Long enough to find Neil Parsons. Long enough to move things around quietly and have a story ready. I called my colleague David at the firm. Not officially. Not as a case. Just a call between people who read documents for a living. I described what I had without using names. He listened and then said 2 things. He said, "That's forgery." And he said, "You need to call the county probate court and you need to do it before anything gets filed. Because once that fraudulent will enters the probate system, it becomes a legal headache that takes years to unwind." I looked at the clock. It was a Tuesday. Courts closed at 4:30. I drove downtown with both documents in a manila folder. The probate clerk was a heavy-set man named Ron, who looked like he had heard everything and was permanently unimpressed by all of it. I explained the situation clearly, and without emotion, I presented the certified copy from Harmon and Reed and told him I had reason to believe a conflicting document was going to be submitted. I asked what the process was for flagging a potential fraudulent filing. Ron looked at me for a moment, then he slid a form across the counter and said I'd want to fill that out. and that I should also speak to the county's estate fraud unit. And did I want that number? I said yes. I filled out the form at a standing counter, while a man behind me argued with a clerk about parking validation. The next 3 days were not dramatic. They were methodical. I requested my grandmother's banking records through proper next-of-kin channels because she had named me co-signatory on one of her accounts years ago for emergency access purposes, and that status had not yet been formally closed. What I found in those records was its own education. 8 months ago, around the time Gerald Marsh retired and Neil Parsons apparently entered the picture, there had been a series of transfers from my grandmother's primary savings account. Small at first $200, $500. Amounts that might look like regular expenses, then larger. A transfer of $4,000 described as home maintenance. A transfer of $6,500 described as medical equipment. My grandmother had been in a care facility for the last 4 months of her life. She had not been home. She had not purchased medical equipment. She had not authorized any home maintenance. The transfers went to a single account. I traced the account number through the routing information to a business registration. The business was called Callaway Property Holdings, LLC. The registered agent was my uncle. He had been draining her accounts for 8 months while she was dying. I did not call him. I did not confront him. I had learned from watching other people's cases what happens when you confront someone before the evidence is secured. They move things. They delete things. They call their own attorneys and build a story. And by the time anyone official arrives, the paper trail has been rearranged. I was not going to give him that. I called the estate fraud unit back, and this time I had numbers. I had account records. I had the LLC registration. I had the 2 wills. I had a timeline. The investigator I spoke to was a woman named Sandra, and when I finished laying it out, she was quiet for a moment and then said, "You've done most of the work already." She told me not to discuss the investigation with any family members. She told me to send everything I had to the email address she gave me. I hit send at 11:47 on a Thursday night, and then I went to bed. Because there was nothing left for me to do, and exhaustion had finally caught me. The call came on a Monday morning. Sandra told me that a warrant had been executed and that I should expect to be contacted by the DA's office for a formal statement. She thanked me for the documentation. She said it had been unusually thorough. I found out what happened at my uncle's house from my cousin, who called me that afternoon. She had not been part of it. I believed that. Or at least I believed she hadn't known the specifics. She was crying. She said there were investigators and they took his computer and a lot of files, and that her mother was hysterical and that she didn't understand what was happening. I told her I was sorry she was going through it. I told her to get her own attorney before she spoke to anyone official. It was the most useful thing I could offer her. My aunt called me an hour later. She was not crying. She was the way my uncle had been in that lawyer's office, quiet. Controlled. Jaw tight. She said I had destroyed the family. She said my grandmother would be ashamed of me. She said I had taken a private matter and handed it to strangers because I was greedy and selfish and had always resented what my uncle built. I listened to her finish. Then I said, "He stole from her while she was dying. He forged her signature to cut me out of what she left me. What he built with her money. That's not a private matter." She hung up. I didn't call back. The official charges came down 6 weeks later. Probate fraud. Forgery of a legal instrument. Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Wire fraud for the electronic transfers. Neil Parsons, the attorney with the shiny suit and careful eyes, was separately charged with document fraud and conspiracy. He had prepared the false will in exchange for a fee. He had notarized a signature that was not my grandmother's. He had done this. Investigators later determined, at least twice before, with other clients. My uncle's case was the one that finally unraveled him. The house is in probate now, proceeding under the legitimate will. The accounts that weren't emptied will be returned. The amounts that were transferred to Callaway Property Holdings, LLC, are the subject of a separate civil action. It will take time. Probate always takes time. But the outcome is no longer in question. I went to my grandmother's house last week for the first time since her funeral. I had a key. I had always had a key. I sat in her kitchen for a while with the lights off, just listening to the particular quiet of a house that knew her. Then I turned the lights on and made a cup of tea in the mug she kept at the back of the cabinet for guests. And I sat there until I felt ready to go through things properly. Her jewelry box was still on the dresser in her bedroom. My uncle hadn't taken it yet. I don't know if he forgot about it or assumed it wasn't worth the risk. I opened it. The gold bracelet with the blue enamel clasp was exactly where it had always been, on the left side of the second tray, next to a cameo brooch that was going to my cousin and a watch that was going to the Literacy Foundation's annual fundraiser as a donated item per the will's instructions. I put the bracelet on. It fit exactly the way I remembered. People talk about justice like it's a feeling like you're supposed to have a moment where everything clicks and you feel whole and healed and finished. It didn't feel like that. It felt like finishing a complex filing where every document is finally in the right place and the record is accurate and what happened is recorded correctly. My grandmother knew what she wanted. She wrote it down clearly with a man she trusted for 22 years. Someone tried to rewrite her last words for his own profit while she was in a care facility and couldn't defend herself. I just made sure the original version survived. That's all I did. I made sure the original survived. If you've ever had to fight for someone who couldn't fight for themselves anymore, leave the word standing in the comments. And if you know someone navigating a situation like this, a will that doesn't feel right, a family member with too much access and too many explanations, share this. It matters more than you think to know that there are steps you can take, and that the paperwork they're counting on you not to read can be the exact thing that brings them down.